We finally know who Islam Makhachev's next opponent's going to be. It's been rumored for a while, but it's official. It's going to be at UFC 330 against Ian Garry. Did the UFC get it right? Did they get it right? Because the welterweight division is stacked. There's a couple of people in line. Obviously, Carlos Prates is one guy that comes to mind. Michael Morales also has credibility to that claim. But I think Ian Garry is the right guy. The UFC absolutely hit the right matchmaking. They hit the nail on the head for this one. No one should really be complaining. As great as Prates has been on a run in the last year and a half, he did lose to Ian Garry last. So you can't really have him leapfrog Prates. You got to wait for that to get settled out between Islam and Garry. So Prates, as much as he's deserving, he doesn't really have a case when it comes to Ian Garry, the fact that he beat them. So in that aspect, it's spot on. You eliminate Prates. As for Michael Morales, as much of a beast he looked like against Sean Brady, the number one contender, you typically would think that would mean that he's the next one in line. And as much as you could make a case for him, it's still Garry, because Garry has been on a more of a bigger tear than Morales against higher opponents. He's been chopping at the bits on the rankings. He beat Bilal. Again, once again, he beat Prates. Obviously, it wasn't that recent, but it's recent enough to still stake a claim for him to be the number one contender for Islam. So I think for that, Morales, as much as it was a great win against Brady, he has to fight one more time against a ranked opponent. In terms of Garry, I just think it's spot on, especially the fact when you go backwards and remember that it seemed like for a little while that the UFC was going to force Kamaru Usman against Islam Makhachev on us. And dear God, no. Look, I'm a big supporter of Kamaru Usman back in the day when he was a champion for those few years plus, had some incredible wins, but you don't get to lose multiple times in a row and then just beat Joaquin Buckley, who's a borderline top 10 fighter in the division, and just think that you have a right to be the next guy in line. So I thought he was tripping. That guy was completely delusional, and of course he's gonna do some home cooking because him and Islam have the same manager, who's a bit of a weirdo, if not a giant weirdo. So thank goodness the UFC did not go that right. They went, surprisingly, with the meritocracy, the right order of things, by giving Ian Garry this fight. It's the right move. There is no better one. So there's 2 months away for that. UFC 330, Philadelphia. It's a pretty nice matchup. Now, what chance does Ian have? It's not looking too much. It's not looking that high. I'd be shocked to say, I'd be hard pressed right now at this moment, mid-June, late June, that Garry has more than a 10% chance to win. I mean, he's going to do much better with the wrestling on the ground than, Jack Della Maddalena did against Islam back in November. So he's got a much better chance handling Islam in that aspect. But there's just going to be very hard to see Islam losing against Ian Garry of all people, right? Like, how is he going to lose to him? Again, I know Ian Garry is a pretty sharp fighter. Probably doesn't get enough credit. It's mainly because he doesn't have, any electric wins and electric finishes. So that usually will dampen any hype or rating of a fighter. But he will probably be in there. I could see that going all 5 rounds. If not, maybe Islam will get like a late round finish on him. But in terms of the matchmaking, this is the right way to go about it. There just was no one else who was more deserving than Ian Garry. And I'm just happy that now we have clarity on who's fighting in August and who Islam's next opponent is. I think that's been a gripe of mine, and maybe you all who also have been indulging in the UFC for the last 8+ years as me have noticed that the UFC sucks at announcing fights now. It's already bad enough that Dana's announcing this on freaking the Pat McAfee show or going on Instagram lives, but now we're getting these fights announcements no sooner than no later than 2 months in advance, sooner in advance, whatever the right proper way of speaking that is. We used to get these like 4 to 5, 6 months in advance. Now these guys are pushing up to like the 2-minute warning. It's kind of annoying because now you don't really have these like, oh, I'm going to look forward to fights for 3-4 months down the line. We got to wait 2 months now. That's kind of crazy. It's also a little wild too for these fighters who don't really get like more than maybe an 8-week camp. That's probably maybe all they want. And maybe it's also what the UFC wants to avoid all this hype. So eventually, like a main event fight falls through the cracks. That's definitely a very possible situation. But it's not like that's an overly common thing, right? But I think that's just a huge gripe of mine. And it just gets annoying. I miss looking as far as to like September and be like, this is a fight. Look. We don't even know who's gonna fight on the UFC Noche Mexico card. I really want to know who's on it. But they announced that Joe Martinez, hell of an announcer, is the one who's gonna do it. So at least they got that out the way. But hopefully we see some change soon. I highly doubt it, though, because these guys are so content and too comfortable with just half-assing everything, which sucks because after seeing UFC Freedom 250 at the White House, the production, the pomp and ceremony was astronomically incredible. But that's a very special occasion, maybe once a year thing that I doubt we're going to see anytime in the near future. As for the other fight on UFC 330 in Philadelphia, it's the co-main event, Mackenzie Dern going up against Gillian Robertson. You're speaking of correct matchmaking. I think this is the proper one as well. There's no one really else at strawweight that's deserving to go against Mackenzie. Gillian Robertson's been on a nice little streak, and she's pretty crispy. I think that's a really good matchup. I wouldn't be surprised if Gillian beats Mackenzie. It's not like Mackenzie may be the champion, but she's not like some barn burner fighter that's just gonna like mow people down. But I think it's evenly matched. It should be a pretty decent fight. Hopefully it's not a snooze fest, but I think we're going to be in for a nice little entertainment. I won't think we'll all look back at it and be like, that was an amazing fight. Although fingers crossed, because that's what we always want, right? But it's evenly matched. It's another fight. This card kind of matches meritocracy perfectly. So I'm glad the UFC is kind of going back to doing that. It's very honorable of them. My one gripe though is, where's Zhang Weili at? Why is she not the next opponent for Mackenzie Dern for her to get her belt back? I'm very confused. Like Zhang got beaten down by Valentina Shevchenko when she tried to go for greatness by taking a step above her in the weight class. Great matchup on paper. Obviously didn't live up to it because Shevchenko's just a beast, and like that weight, that going up in weight was just too much for Zhang considering her how small she is. But tip of the cap for her for trying. That was already in November, and by the time this card happens for her belt that she's supposed to reclaim is in August, we're going to look at it's going to be almost a year, 9 months, over 9 months. Why is she not back? That's perfect enough time for her to rest, recover, reset, and get back down. Now, unless she's hoping to stay in that weight, she shouldn't. I'm not sure if she's going to have much better outings against opponents like Erin Blanchfield or, Alexa Grasso or something like that. Stay away from going up in weight again. Just stay where you're at and go back to fighting Mackenzie. So I think that's the one thing I'm confused about, why she's not fighting. Because look, if this fight's happening in August, there's no way the winner of that fight, whether it's Mackenzie or Gillian, is gonna turn around in December. It's possible, but the way those championship fights are going, just in championship fights in general, like they usually take like 6 months at a time at least. So if we're Zhang Weili, we're looking at well over a year before she comes back. And that just sucks because she's always a joy, a treat to watch, dominating that division. Her and Mackenzie would have been an entertaining fight. At least it would have been one-sided for sure, I think. I don't think Mackenzie stands the snowball's chance in hell to dethrone Zhang Weili. So that would have been a great fight to see. Zhang probably gets the first or second round finish. But, time will tell when we're going to see when she comes back. But all in all, solid card, for remaining co-main event. It's nothing that's to run or write home about in terms of like, this is a banger of a card, but it's the right card. It's well match made. And now it's going to be, what's it going to mean when one of these two fighters, from each fight, Mackenzie Dern, Gillian Robertson, Islam Makhachev, Ian Garry, what's going to be the next step? Who's next? That's going to be critical who wins these fights. So looking forward to it. Philadelphia is going to be a hell of a crowd. And 2 months from now, we can't wait. But until then, we got International Fight Week with Conor McGregor and Max Holloway. So just great consecutive cards that the UFC's putting on. You got this month, White House. So all of them were great. And then you got International Fight Week. It's a stacked card, too, aside from the main event. And then you go into Islam Makhachev making his return at welterweight. So UFC's cooking a little bit, even though I wish they would announce them sooner. faster, more ahead of time, just for us to get more excitement. But all in all, solid matchmaking has been conducted by them.